Hey folks, this is Riker with a gaming news wrap-up video where we discuss the happenings of the week. This week's topics include the disappointing update in the story of Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard, bad news for Dungeons & Dragons, what Diablo would look like as a 1980s movie, and more. As always, discussion timestamps can be found in the description below. But right before you skip ahead, just a quick reminder to ring that sub notification bell to be alerted to new Saturday episodes and stay up to date with gaming news highlights. Now before I move on, just a quick word from this video's sponsor, Keeps, which is all about keeping your hair. About 2 out of 3 guys will experience some form of male pattern baldness by the time they reach 35. Some men lean into that shaved head look, but some enjoy having and styling hair and want to know if they have any options. Now there's no magic cure for baldness, but there are preventative steps to stop it from progressing and keep the hair you have. Keeps is a subscription service that focuses on making it easier and more affordable for men to treat their male pattern baldness, all from the comfort of their home, using clinically proven, research-backed treatments at about half the cost of a traditional pharmacy. Physicians at Keeps will help pick the right treatment plan for you, and every treatment plan comes with a full year of unlimited messaging, and then it's as simple as subscribing and having everything you need delivered right to your door, with refill reminders sent to ensure you don't run out of what you need. Hair loss stops with Keeps. To get 50% off your first order, go to keeps.com/Riker or click the link in the description. That's keeps.com/RHYKKER. Starting off with some quick Starfield news, we got reconfirmation this week that the game arrives exclusively on Xbox Series X and S and PC in the first half of 2023. This follows the delay from its planned November 22nd, 2022 release date. Some fans were concerned that we would see another delay, but it seems things are still on track, at least for now. Fingers crossed. In some other quick news, who remembers the class action lawsuit that was filed against CD Projekt Red over Cyberpunk 2077? This was shortly after the game launched. The lawsuit was filed and alleged that the devs misled investors about the state of the game prior to launch, which ended up being a hot mess, and thus lost investors tons of money. Well, a settlement has been reached. CD Projekt Red will pay out $1.85 million, and in exchange, they don't have to admit to deliberately misleading investors. Cyberpunk is in a much better state today, but back then, players or prospective players who were hoping for the game to be the second coming led to an incredible amount of outrage and disappointment when the game first launched. In an update on the Microsoft acquisition of Activision Blizzard, the pre-trial with the United States Federal Trade Commission has begun. In December, the FTC sued to block the acquisition, and court hearings began on January 3rd. And the fight between the FTC and Microsoft has continued to turn ugly. Now, part of the FTC's argument to blocking the acquisition is that Call of Duty is such a hugely successful and important franchise in gaming that if it's going to fall into Microsoft's hands and then they potentially will make it exclusive, well, that'll seriously harm Sony's ability to compete. Well, Microsoft responded to this, that Call of Duty is too important to let you buy it, by playing dumb, claiming it doesn't even really know how much money Call of Duty generates or even when the series first released. That's just like, come on, man. It's like when you catch a guy checking out a girl and he's like, What? Oh, no, she has boobs? I didn't notice. I didn't even know she was standing there. Nothing really productive has come out of the pre-trial. Neither side has had serious talks about a settlement. If they do reach a settlement, then they would not need to go to full trial. And that full trial itself is scheduled to begin in August. Once a judge then makes a decision on whether the acquisition can go through or not, both parties will have the option to appeal the result, further delaying the acquisition, which was originally expected to be completed by summer 2023. Now, speaking with GamesIndustry.biz, analyst Piers Harding-Rolls believes the acquisition will go through, but with concessions, like including certain games on Microsoft's Game Pass, and assuring that certain titles will be available on competing services. He believes that if Microsoft agrees to concessions before going to court in August, then the deal could close within the first half of the year. Otherwise, it can drag well into the second half of the year. In other Microsoft news, a group of 300 QA workers, 300, one of my favorite movies, 300 QA workers at ZeniMax, which is owned by Microsoft as of a couple years ago. These QA workers have voted to form a union, And Microsoft willingly recognized the union, meaning the next step will now just be negotiations. Now, this is in contrast to the unions that have been forming at Activision Blizzard, for instance. Activision Blizzard did not willingly recognize the unions and actively fought unionization efforts. The 300 QA workers are from a number of ZeniMax's different studios, including Bethesda, Arcane, and id. And I think we're plainly seeing now why corporations were so terrified of unions. A couple years ago, we had no unions at all in the US gaming industry. Now Activision Blizzard broke the seal, and we're seeing union after union forming, coming through the floodgates. Now, in June, Microsoft had entered a labor neutrality agreement with the CWA. That's the Communications Workers of America, the largest communications and media labor union in the US. As per that agreement, the CWA would support Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard if Microsoft agreed to take a neutral stance on unionization activities. But that agreement only covered Activision Blizzard employees, so Microsoft now is going above and beyond. The president of the CWA said, quote, "Microsoft has lived up to its commitment to its workers and let them decide for themselves whether they want a union. Other video game and tech giants have made a conscious choice to attack, undermine, and demoralize their own employees when they join together to form a union. Microsoft is charting a different course which will strengthen its corporate culture and ability to serve its customers, and should serve as a model for the industry and as a blueprint for regulators." Then, in some Dungeons & Dragons news, Wizards of the Coast, the developer, has cancelled a bunch of video game projects, at least 5 D&D games. And this comes after the company had made a big investment into the video game market. It built 6 internal game studios in different cities and signed contracts with several other dev studios. But in all that time, the only thing that's come out of that has been Baldur's Gate 3, which is set to launch in early access this year and has been received well so far. So that's something very good to come out of it. But apart from that, we've just had 2021's D&D Dark Alliance, which was received rather poorly. The company that owns Wizards of the Coast, Hasbro, has been suffering lately. Its shares dropped about 40% in value year over year. Now, there's been a lot of controversy in the Magic the Gathering community. That's the other major property that Wizards of the Coast owns. Or arguably, that's their major property and D&D is their secondary property. And the outrage in the community is because Wizards has been churning out card packs faster and faster than players can keep up at this point, leading fans to believe that the company has just gotten too greedy. Now, recently, the company has also expressed that it needs to better monetize Dungeons & Dragons, which is more news that hasn't been received well by fans. Then on top of all that, there's been talk recently that the upcoming next edition of Dungeons & Dragons will see a change to its open gaming license. Wizards is looking to severely restrict what kind of third-party content can be created. To explain briefly, currently anyone can make a, let's call it a mod for Dungeons & Dragons. So that mod could be an adventure module, which would be like a mission pack or a map pack. I'm trying to make video game analogies here. This could be a resource with extra classes or extra races or features that are all fan-made. Could be new magic items, whatever, anything. As long as you follow the licensing agreement, you can create and publish this content and even sell it. So today, there are content creators within the D&D community, and even within indie companies, whose business model revolves around selling these D&D mods. Now, to be honest, it was nice of Hasbro to allow this entire time. It's been years, decades even. In fact, it's because of this open gaming license that D&D's biggest competitor, Pathfinder, arose, which began its life largely as D&D 3.75 edition after many fans rejected the official D&D 4th edition from Wizards of the Coast. So Hasbro was allowing all this time competitors to potentially arise through this open gaming license. But for the most part, this has just been a great boon for the D&D community and for consumers. We had access to more resources, people were incentivized to produce high-quality resources knowing they could sell them. So what changes are now being made to the open gaming license? Well, that depends on how much money you're making. If you're earning over $750,000 in revenue, which includes money you would gain from a Kickstarter, then you need to pay royalties for every dollar after $750,000 to the tune of 20 to 25%. Note, that is revenue and not profit. Now, while this largely affects businesses and not so much the little guy, This will become burdensome on the little guys, who will now have to register every product they intend to sell with Wizards of the Coast, with full details on where they intend to sell the product and at what price. Also, and perhaps more damningly, Wizards of the Coast will have the right to use any content made under the license. The new license states that Wizards will have a, quote, non-exclusive, perpetual, irrevocable, worldwide, sub-licensable, royalty-free license to use that content for any purpose. So, for instance, if a competitor starts to arise, Wizards of the Coast could just take it. They can just decide that they own that now, and they'll start selling it instead. If I'm understanding the legalese, that is. So for those of us in the video game world, this sounds normal. Game devs don't allow fans to monetize mods. But the problem here is that this stuff has been allowed for years and years, and again, decades, as we said. So changing the system now, when, especially now, the community, we are in a D&D renaissance. It's perhaps more popular today than it even was in its heyday in the 80s. Now that we got this whole community and creators, things that we didn't even have so much back then, that are so accustomed to things being this way, well, now that you're going to change it, of course the community is not going to take it well. Then, in some Blizzard news, it turns out that Blizzard quality assurance testers get paid less than those at Riot and Bungie. You see, California and Washington recently enacted new laws regarding pay transparency, which does not mean you must be paid in invisible dollar bills, but rather that businesses in certain sectors must share the pay range of roles at their companies. Shack News noted that Riot pays its QA engineers on Teamfight Tactics between $98,000 to $133,000 per year. Bungie pays their test leads on Destiny between $86,000 and $108,000, and Blizzard pays its test leads on Diablo 4 between $50,000 and $92,000. Now, according to Shack News, these jobs are all similar enough in their duties, performances, such that you can compare the pay scales, but even if you want to rule out the Riot QA engineer, then you're still comparing two test lead positions. Bungie's test lead starts at a salary that is significantly higher than Blizzard's test leads, $86,000 versus $50,000. And again, that's for a lead position. We're not talking about a base entry-level QA worker. Also, Blizzard's offices are in Irvine, California, which is a really expensive place to live, and I'd wager that $50,000 is not nearly enough for someone to support themselves without a roommate. Now, this just confirms anecdotes over the years that Blizzard, in general, pays less than other companies, and in the past, this was basically for the prestige of working at Blizzard. Any Blizzard veteran would have no problem getting a job anywhere else in the industry. Blizzard historically would hire people that were just super passionate about Blizzard and Blizzard games, and so it would just be a dream job. And so these people are altogether just willing to settle for a lower salary that they can get at a different company. Then lastly, in some Diablo news, we'll once again revisit our Diablo Community Corner, spotlighting some interesting things in the Diablo community. And this week it's going to be about AI-generated images, but not artwork. Redditors Robson and Paranisis have been using the Midjourney AI to create images of what a Diablo movie may look like if it was made in the 80s, a la Conan the Barbarian. Here we have Akara in the Rogue Encampment. Here we have the Barbarian in the Den of Evil. I mean, this is basically just Schwarzenegger as Conan. Here we have skeletons in the Burial Grounds. Looks like very 80s practical effects. Here we have the activation of the Cairn Stones. Here we have Deckard Cain in Tristram. I don't agree with this one. I don't think that's a good Deckard Cain. He's too young. Maybe this is a druid or something. Here we have the Tomb of Tal Rasha. Here we're arriving in Kurast. And here's the Dark Wanderer. Those are from Paranisis. And then here are some from Robson. Here's Diablo himself. Here's Tristram Village, the Dark Wanderer, Lilith. I can totally see that as the kind of makeup and costume you'd have in the 80s. Here we have Marius, the guy who was in the asylum. Mephisto, that's a very good Mephisto doll. The Necromancer, of course, holding that puppet off screen so that you can move it. Here's the Skeleton King, interesting take. And Tyrael in what is very much an 80s costume rendition of how they would pull that off. And then here is another image of Lilith. Again, a very believable makeup and costuming job from that era. And that's going to wrap up this week's video. But do be sure to have checked out last week's video in which we discussed why gamers are suing Microsoft. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch, Patreon, and YouTube supporters for making these videos possible. If you like what you see on this channel and want to support the creation of more content, you can consider pledging on YouTube or Patreon and unlocking behind-the-scenes content, monthly virtual hangouts, and more. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Riker's Raiders for more gaming content.